Hello, welcome once again. One more week of this travel the world, the ways that we travel, international studies, international relations. Today we're going to talk about voluntourism. Voluntourism. This is, you can think of it as kind of the cousin or maybe the stepbrother, brother, sibling of short-term missions trips. They have some things in common and they have some very similar pitfalls. So the reading for today, it's an introductory kind of a text that wants to, or that seeks to introduce you to the concept. And what it is there's an alternative tourism arising, and it's a sort of rebuke of this mass tourism that insists or engenders a kind of consumption mindset. So that now there's an alternative, more discriminating, socially and environmentally sustaining tourist experience that you can tap into. Things like educational tourism, farm tourism, cultural exchange tourism, scientific tourism, and then what we're going to talk about today, which is volunteer tourism. So towards a definition, this is the definition they propose. To volunteer in an organized way to undertake holidays that may involve the aiding or alleviating material poverty of some groups in society, the restoration of certain environments, or research into aspects of society or environments. So this takes a more macro approach, and it includes notions of alternative, real, ecological, and of course, responsible. But within this, there's a critique of this mass tourism, as I mentioned just now, and it seeks to move away from the idea that the tourist is going to go, he or she's going to do sightseeing in this authentic experience. We can talk again about these, predetermined circuits, right? It also seeks to get away from the destination as image for the tourist, so that the tourist can gaze upon the other. So there's a little bit of a different kind of conception or mentality that we're getting at. So what are the benefits? What are the questions that we can pose before we embark on this volunteer tourism, on this voluntourism? What are the prerequisites? What is the nature of the experience, they ask? What message does the visitor receive? What attitudes do they walk away with? What are the successful outcomes? What are the specific things that we're looking for when we leave? Or what are the specific outcomes when working with local communities? And also, of course, what are the key problems or the key issues that we need to overcome? The question is always about authenticity. This is what we look for anytime we travel. I read Lonely Planet, and there's a section there, Off the Beaten Path. And Off the Beaten Path, what it typically tries to do is get you into contact, it's authentic contact with the culture, to escape the sort of predetermined, pre-established circuits that you can just kind of fall into, these loops, right? But the idea is that traditionally you take a vacation, and your vacation is meant to be a kind of escape from your work, from your day-to-day. And so everything about this vacation, everything about this experience is about the manipulation of the well-being. And we should note the importance of this. It is important to take a break, to walk away, to step away. And I should note also that the research is not kind on North Americans. They don't take too many vacations. There are a number of there's a speculation around it. Some studies indicate that I've seen some studies where 30 to 40% of Americans take vacation. The United States happens to be one of the few countries that doesn't require employers to offer paid vacation to their employees. In 2018, 768 million days of vacation went unused. And another study noted that 54% of Americans feel guilty when they go on vacation. And a high percentage of employees, when they go on vacation, they check back in. They're looking to see what is happening at their work. So it's difficult. It's hard to walk away from your job and not think about it. Another study indicated that Americans don't take vacation because they're afraid of losing their job. There's this idea that if they realize that the company can survive without me, what good am I, or what use do they have for me? And so they just simply don't take vacation. So I want to note the importance of this escape, right? Taking care of your well-being, but we can also be careful in how we encounter other cultures, other countries, how we walk in, and what we do. So again, be careful how we view the destination or the people that live in these destinations, right? The tourist and their gaze. There's a reference to, and I love this reference to the Baudelairian flaneur, right? which is seen as a precursor to the 20th century tourist, right? This guy who's kind of walking around and aimlessly wandering the streets, kind of gazing at other people and taking note, but really there's no destination in mind. There's a recognition too within mass tourism that the marginalized communities rarely, if at all, have a voice. Do they get to dictate or say what happens or how people enter into their countries? We could also arrive at what's called sort of manufactured cultural experience. I remember a professor who took students to New Zealand, and he reported back saying that his impression was that, they're taking these students to different indigenous communities, but the sense that he got was that it wasn't very authentic, that he felt badly. Also, he felt that these communities were kind of putting on their costumes and dancing a little bit, and his students were taking pictures, and then there's this, they separate, they go their different ways. And so there's a question as to who does that really benefit, right? Again, going back to the idea of the gaze, the tourist needs something to gaze at. So tourism is still and continues to be viewed as a consumptive rather than alternative or productive or sustainable praxis. And that's what they're trying to get away from as we enter into volunteer tourism or voluntourism. So the goal with voluntourism is for tourists to, and I quote, become creative actors who engage in behaviors that are mutually beneficial to host communities and to the cultural and social environment of those communities. One such example of this would be ecotourism, something that has become more and more increasingly popular, to engage in a way that is ecologically friendly. I remember when I was in Guatemala, we stayed in one of these hotels or hostels that said we are eco-friendly. All of the electricity, the energy that we use, it's all renewable, the food that we serve, etc. There's a problem also in that this type of tourism has also undergone a process of mass commodification. So now this is what people are looking for, so this is what we're going to provide. And there's always a question as to how ecologically friendly are they really? How environmentally friendly are they really? At that point, you do as much research as you can, but there's a point where you have to simply trust the people that you engage with. Volunteer tourism is less an actual product and more a range of behaviors or a way of thinking. So again, I mentioned earlier that there are a number of studies that reveal this disempowerment between the host communities or how they feel and the consequences of our visit, the consequences of our work. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they've attempted to bridge these gaps, and they've done, for the most part, a pretty good job. They have that flexibility in that they can move around. They don't have the limits that often government places on their own institutions, and they can also seek out opportunities to engage with the local community. But there's also a question, right? Not all NGOs are created equal. So you have to be careful which NGOs you work with. In the relationship and power dynamics, the text brings up Michel Foucault. You've probably come across him at some point, his readings, his lectures, his debates. He seems to be everywhere. He's one of the most quoted thinkers in the humanities. I read once that nobody is quoted more than Michel Foucault. But he has the book, Discipline and Power, and they quote him as saying this, as writing this: "The problem is to both distinguish the events, differentiate the networks and levels to which they belong, and to reconstitute the threads which connect them and make them give rise to one another." So it's very abstract maybe, but I think it's the first step in a series of things that you can do, right? We think about this dynamic, this relationship that is occurring, and then we can take action, take part, participate, or choose a different path, a different way. But the idea always is to bring these two worlds together, the host community and the volunteer. And how do we do this in an ethical way, in a way that's not going to affect anybody negatively? So this was an introductory. This is what voluntourism tries to get at. But there are also pitfalls and there are also dangers that we need to consider, similar to short-term missions trips. I want to turn now to chapter 2, which is called Pettin' the Critters, Exploring the Complex Relationship Between Volunteers and the Voluntoured in Mcdowell County, West Virginia, USA, and Tijuana, Mexico. This is a great article, great case study, because it brings into contact two communities, one in the United States and one in Mexico, and it kind of does a comparison, and some of the results might surprise you. But it starts off with a long discussion of the method, how they gathered their information, how they went about interviewing, and this is really good for you to see how these types of studies are done, how they arrive at conclusion. So I encourage you to take stock of that. I also like the fact that they acknowledge that there could be an implicit bias with case studies. Right? We have to be careful with case studies. We can't generalize from case studies, but at the same time, they can provide kind of a window into the way in which we travel, the way in which we encounter or engage with local communities. And they also do a good job of interviewing different organizations. So it's not one organization in each place, but it's a number of organizations. So they focus on two issues in particular: dependency and the role of religion. So they start with Appalachia. It's estimated that 10,000 volunteers come to this county every year. This is about 1/3 of the county's own population. So it's a tremendous amount of people that arrive. And they come and they build homes, they do home improvement type things, after school programs, things that you may have done as well. I worked for an organization called Confrontation Point Ministries, and I did kind of the same thing. This was in Tennessee, so in that area, in that region, and that's what we did. We brought youth groups from around the country, and we worked on different projects for 1 week: home improvement, build decks, and then we also did some adventure stuff. We went rock climbing, caving with the students, and it was a sort of 1 week long experience. So that's the kind of thing that they're talking about. The two organizations in particular that they reference: Mustard Seeds and Mountain, and the Mcdowell County Mission. And there's also Adventures in Mission. They do the same kind of work, outreach activities, door-to-door evangelism, etc. And they switch to Tijuana, Mexico. Tijuana is a highly voluntoured city, probably because of its proximity to the United States, the ease with which we can arrive. And there really is no governmental regulation of these volunteer tourists or the volunteer tourism organizations. There's no kind of governance, right? A body that's gonna say there are too many people on this side, not enough over here. What kind of resources are necessary or needed? They bring up Los Niños and Esperanza as two organizations, and they take this. Los Niños in particular takes the approach of training the trainers. That's their mentality. So they focus on education. They work and build on elementary schools, etc. And then Esperanza provides microcredits that can lead to home ownership or ownership of businesses. These are the organizations that they reference. But there's a problem, there's an issue with dependency or othering. And they talk about coping strategies of the Voluntoured. I love the story that they tell about a group, an organization that wanted to drop off used clothing. And in the conversation, they reject this and they say, no, send us the clothes and we will sell them to the people at a very, very low cost. And the response is kind of, no, that's not what we want to do. That's not how we want to volunteer. We want to set up a truck somewhere. We want to hand the clothes to the people. Presumably, they don't say this, but presumably to feel the gratitude or to see the gratitude from the people. And this is what she refers to. This is where we get to the title of the article, which is petting the critters. And this is the term that she's created to categorize this type of volunteering, right? Do they really want to help, or do they want to come and pet the critters? And if you're offended by this, I hope you're not, but I hope there's a moment of self-reflection, of self-awareness to the kinds of ways in which we may have volunteered in the past. So these groups, they are givers. They want to come, they want to volunteer, and they want to help, but they also want to take something. What is it that they want to take? They want to take a sense of appreciation, right? They want the people to thank them. There needs to be a sense of self-affirmation, right? They also need pictures, maybe. This is difficult or complicated, but a good question that you could ask is, would you do this kind of work even if you couldn't take pictures of what you're doing? If you couldn't upload it to Instagram and Facebook, would you still do this kind of work? With Los Niños and Esperanza, they also have a no handouts policy. And this has to do with, of course, with a sense of ownership, a sense of self-respect, if you will. Another organization, the United Methodist Relief Center, they build houses in Charleston, South Carolina, and they have this great policy where the volunteers, they cannot meet, or they don't meet the people for whom they are building these houses. And often they get into a conversation where, we want to meet the people, and then the question that gets asked is, why do you want to meet these people? Is it so they can thank you for the work? And if that's the case, think of how the situation or the position that you're putting these people in. The chapter ends with a discussion on organized religion and volunteer tourism. The role of organized religion, they write, seems to be the elephant in the living room. In Appalachia, there seems to be a preference for church groups or faith-based groups, even though the people there reportedly don't go to church. In Tijuana, it's the opposite, however. All groups are reported as favorable, but the church groups were at the very bottom of this list. They talk about the God talk. When are we going to get the God talk? And this is sort of the price that they have to pay in order to receive the help. So anyway, I hope that these experiences, they've illustrated the complexities of the relationship between the volunteer tourist and the community, the Voluntoured, they call them. So in conclusion, these experiences, I hope they illustrate the types of complexities and difficulties when entering into communities, whether to help or to gaze upon the other. Ultimately, the question I'm sure that we can all ask, or at least engage with, is in the case of Appalachia, they note that people have been coming for 30 years, and yet what has changed? Has anything changed? They note that no, nothing has changed. So how much good are these groups actually doing? But they also are very careful with not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So what are some suggestions? They suggest reducing the number of volunteers, not so many volunteers. Less is more. Be more selective, right? And careful in how we choose the kinds of people that come, and also the types of projects that they take on. Of course, there needs to be better tracking, better gathering of information, of data, to understand the impact of these different groups in the region. And they're very careful to suggest that we're not saying don't come at all. In the same way as Ivan Illich suggested, it's not that you shouldn't go anywhere, that you shouldn't help. It's that there needs to be much more self-awareness, much more work done before you come to talk about what it is that you're actually doing and how we are actually engaging with these communities.